Right. Hey guys, it's Ryan from Exoderma Exponential World.
Hey guys, this is Lou, also from Exoderma.
Today we're going to talk about the development of language and sort of what it looks like on the timeline and sort of the steps we're going through right now in encapsulating language and meaning into machines. And I go ahead and let Lou start, because what we're talking about again in the beginning is the development of language and the context of before humans talked to each other, or any previous ancient man talked to each other. They communicated, I imagine, with grunts. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, this is a rock. Like, the rock didn't exist yet. You just grunt for rock. All right. So there's some barrier, some transition point in which the human mind developed the ability to assign a sound or a tone or something to an object or something. And what's your take on it, Lou?
Yeah, man. I mean, all right. So I think that type of and my knowledge on like the timeline, like how long ago all this stuff happened, is terrible. So I'm not gonna be able to specifically tell you like how long ago this all happened or whatever. And I'm completely open to being completely wrong about all this. So just putting that out there before I say any of this stuff. Okay, so dogs, right? Dogs can associate certain sounds with certain types of actions or objects, stuff like that. So dogs have that ability already. So humans definitely had that ability going into 200,000 years ago when Homo sapiens supposedly was initially beginning, right? So yeah, humans have this ability to associate sounds with objects, and they have this ability to associate certain, I guess, movements or types of activities also with sounds. But then the more interesting part of it is when they start doing more than just object association with these sounds, and they start constructing more elaborate patterns for communicating what is an idea. It's no longer about objects in the world. It's about an inner mental state that you have that wants to come out and be expressed, right? So that, I don't know when that happened. I don't know when humans started doing that.
So, man, this is such an interesting. I love this topic because it really, I love reading about this stuff and researching like my own kind of like on my own, because these concepts, which most of us take for granted and don't realize that we actually have, took a long time to develop, and they developed for very specific reasons. And it's like, we can't specifically say why, it would just be speculation, but we can remark upon the existence and actually assign some kind of end effect to the function, right? And so what's super interesting to me is like, so language, they theorize that had developed around 50,000 years ago, right? The first civilization was 10,000 years ago. That's the Mesopotamian civilization. And they are credited for the first writing system. So this is post-language development. This is writing system. Now we all speak this language. Now we want to represent it on a physical tablet or something, right? And, they use cuneiform. So 40,000 years before them, we had started, assumingly now, again, it makes a very valid point that I believe dogs can hold up to like 150 or 100 words or something like that within their memory, and are able to call them within certain situation and context. Now, you could argue what their understanding of the language is, but I don't think it really matters when it comes to expression of the organism, right? And when I say expression of the organism, I mean it very specifically, because if you look at the first kinds of interactions with reality that humans or ancient man had, it's in the artwork. It's in that we were already expressing these things that were in our minds. We just didn't have language necessarily to associate. But we could draw a buffalo, right? We could do these things, but there perhaps wasn't an actual, like, I guess the complexity of the sound is what we're talking about here. Is like that, and then switching in from representing objects. Like the example that I learned was like rock, right? Like you want to represent if you want to go find more rocks, you just name something a rock, and then everybody knows to go look for a rock. And so, or something looks like this, that's now a rock. And so you keep doing that over and over again. And obviously humans have a longer term memory as well. So we're able to store more language. It's just a fascinating thing, because like, um, it's man, it's such a massive thing. Like language is it's supposedly like the reflection, like it allows us to create these like he said, conceptualize these ideas in our minds and then reflect on them. And that is and probably one of the larger players in consciousness, but that's just speculation. I don't know. I'm going on here, man, because it's super fascinating. But you have any thoughts?
No, yeah, this is good because I want to, the thing that you're doing right now itself is language, right? It's the expression of what your idea of this whole topic is, and that's exactly what we've developed an ability to do. And so I have this idea or this hypothesis of the fact that we nourish our bodies, right? So we nourish our bodies with food and sustenance, and there's that type of nourishment. But I also feel that there's a mental nourishment that we also provide each other with in the form of these vocal acoustic sounds that we share with each other. And it could lead to moments of malnourishment, right? When the sounds and the voices that you're listening to are maybe negative or just, I don't know, just trash being spoken out of it. I don't know. I don't know how to say this without, I mean, because there's a fear sometimes of being too judgmental or criticizing others, like, and just accepting like what they want to talk about or what they want to say with their freedom of speech. But I also feel that there's another side to that where you have to have a judgmental side to your psyche or to your own viewpoint of life, because that's how you discriminate between what you think is right and wrong, or what you like and dislike, and all these other things that we have to decide. But yeah, so I feel that you can put yourself in situations where what you're listening to is actually, providing you negative things.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I call it, so I have I guess a hypothesis, but I've named it the human ECM. It's called the human extracellular matrix. And I call it the human ECM because it goes back to my whole theory of nodes and networks and everything. If you look at the human body and the way it handles force, hypothetically, it's a speculation again that I assume it handles it via a series of tissue networks, right? Now, these tissue networks are mounted on extracellular matrices, and it allows these individual cells to operate as a single organism with the cells around it, even though it's not technically connected, except for via the carbohydrates and proteins that it expels. Now, those carbohydrates and proteins, in other words, are human expression. And human expression is what either holds us together or does not when it comes to, I guess we'll say, resistant forces, right? So the human ECM literally means that if you're around negative energy, negative talk, it is detrimental to your overall psyche. It's not crazy because humans are not individual nodes. They are, a part of a massive network. And so it's incredibly important. Like, and this goes back to sort of like, this, what we're talking about now sort of goes like in between this understanding between what I call language and paradigms. Like what we call language and reality, where certain people use language that excludes what you believe in a way, and not necessarily intentionally, but there are ways to encapsulate ideas that are, let's say, non-inclusive. I'm not sure if I'm going with that. And it's hard to explain it because it's like the human extracellular matrix means that we're all doing this whole thing together. That's all it means. And when it comes to language, man, we got really off track. But let me dial back to language and why I think this is integral. Is because humans now use language to identify. We no longer use language to just to name an object. This is no longer a ball. I am no longer practicing fitness. I am a fitness professional, right? I no longer learn to code. I'm a coder. I'm an engineer, right? We identify with objects, and those objects have like their language, their attachments. And so this is a very interesting thing where your reality can sort of exclude other realities because the language that you use and that you hear around you.
So yeah, there's also this interesting notion of, man, we could go so many places with this conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's this aspect of our language that we use now that allows us to describe that ego personal experience that we have, right? And we call it the I, right? Every time you use a sentence and you're saying I, you're using self-referential tools in the language. which didn't exist before. You know, there was no concept of I. There was no individual I. Way long ago, before language was developed, and people could make that distinction between, you know, me and someone else and others. Essentially, I think there's also tribes that develop languages where they don't have an I in their language. They use we and us, and that's how they express their.
You read the Bible, obviously. That's how God refers to like himself in the Bible. First part, it's always us, we, or our. And it's very interesting you bring that up. I never thought about that before, because I imagine there are entire languages that no longer exist that did not have an individual, a self-identity. They were about the survival and the growth of the group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, really, go ahead.
No, I was like, this just really goes in a lot of directions. Like, I never really thought about I mean, again, it goes into realities and paradigms. Like, if you don't use the word I, then you never, like, I would imagine that self-confidence, this issue with self-confidence wouldn't exist anymore. Since a lot of people, they use the word I, it's generally to do with their lack of self-belief, right? Or maybe their self-belief in general. It could be one of the two, like how much they believe in themselves or how much they don't believe in themselves. And so it's like, if you were to remove the self from the language, would the issue with confidence itself with other people actually be removed altogether as well? That really brings into a lot of context around language and wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the thing that you talked about before about writing it down too, I think was super important, right? Because we spoke it for thousands of years before we started actually writing it down. So the chronology of it, and also before I get into that, like how important body language is. You know, that's another type of language that exists. And maybe it was in parallel development with spoken language, because when we talk, you know, we use our hands to do things. We point somewhere, we expand. If we want to say, oh, it was huge, you know, it was small, it was tiny. We use that type of communication with the spoken language on top of that. So yeah, it's visual and it's auditory language, right? And like we say, it goes back to this expression of your inner thought. And sometimes you may have this inner idea that can't come out as expressed language because you don't have the vocabulary yet, or you don't have the proper words, right? You don't know what to call that thing that you're seeing but can't put out.
That happens to me. Yes, that's exactly. That's exactly. Wow. And it takes someone else recapitulating what it is, and I'm trying to. I can't. The words I would use would be a lot of words because I don't completely understand it. And so it's like when someone recaps it, it's like, oh yeah, this is what you're talking about. It's like, oh shit, wow, that's it. Like, wow, that's so crazy. That's exactly what I'm like. I feel it. I can feel it. I'm intuitively grasping for something, not quite sure what it looks like, but when I hear it, I know what it is. I'm like, oh shit, I was using 100 words to describe this, and I only needed 5. And that's like a simple explanation when it comes to like, and that goes to conciseness. And to your point with the body language, you know, humans were very tribal by nature. Like we were, like as research shows, we were in tribes of 150 people, 200 people, give or take. And that were other tribes of people, obviously. And it was a very unforgiving time, we'll say. And I do imagine that you had to be very attentive to your body language. Like you don't look certain animals in the eye. Why? You don't look a gorilla in the eye, for instance, if you're like about to walk up on its troop. You know what I mean? Like that wouldn't be smart. You got to show respect. Like, hey man, I'm not here to steal your woman. You know what I mean? I'm just here to look at you guys because she's not my type. You feel me?
She ain't that hot.
But not for real though. Like it's such an interesting concept because it means that like language was used for a multitude of reasons, even though it was like developed over a long time. I think what largely though, to be honest, interests me is like, if we're talking like, so language develops, right? That means for 40,000 years, give or take, we just told stories. So we memorize vegetables, plants, animals, people, probably entire family lines, clearly stories of gods and goddesses. Like all these things have coalesced into these massive stories over time. And then finally, like, you know, we have civilization, we have cuneiform and writing, and we're able to, and this is a form of expression, by the way. These things existed. We may not have been able to write about them, but human expression of the abstract is something that we've been doing for a long time.
Yeah, and you know what, I tried looking it up, and actually the cuneiform that they find, the most ancient, you know, texts, they're about finance and like keeping track of accounting and stuff like that for like the kings and stuff like that. So it goes to show that writing was only capable of being like invented or thought of, or being, I don't know, man. It had to be like a group of people. I don't see it coming out of one person. Like it's so ridiculously hard for it to come out of just one person.
I have multiple.
Although like they have these stories in their mythology, right? Where they're like, oh, there was this guy called Scriptus or whatever his name was, and he was the first person to write, or he was the first guy that spoke, or he was like the inventor of music. This guy was the inventor of art. Like they have their gods, right? But I don't know. I think it must have been a group of people who just, I don't know. They understood each other. It just intuitively, and had an idea of what they all wanted to create, and they just started with a simple system. When civilization was able to settle down, and you didn't have to fight for your life every day, you didn't have to freaking build a house every night and put out a fire, and do all these other things, because you were already with other people who had built like a stable environment for you to flourish.
Yeah, they don't really distinctualize in between or differentiate in between the first writing system and the first number system that you wrote. Or like, there is the first number system, right, in which the Mesopotamian civilization used a base 60 measurement, and that's how we have 360. We have a whole bunch of shit. Nonetheless, it's like there's no strong distinction between why we have numbers and why we have language. And I personally believe they're two separate events. And one of the theories, not my theory, I forgot where I read it from, is that one of the first developed number systems were tallies. It was to keep track of sheep. It was to keep track of pigs. It was to keep track of resources. And I call it resource allocation. In fact, my theory behind this goes behind the whole networking supermassive organism theory, in which all organisms will, at least to their best ability, try to organize themselves in a way where resource allocation is something that supports the survival of the organism. And in this context, it means knowing how much food you have. It means knowing how many people are in your tribe, because there's a point in which a civilization is birthed from a tribe or multiple tribes. And so you have to be able to aggregate all of the resources and distribute them based upon some system. And then we got to get into class systems, and then we got to get into belief systems. And those aren't necessarily language things, but they are. The belief system is those are human expression things. But again, man, it gets so exciting, because it means that one of our first systems we developed was to keep track of resources for the survival of the organism, like for all of humans. We don't really have strong, we're not really good at that too much today. We'll say there's so much to do, but
yeah, man. And on top of this, like, okay, so these languages are being developed, like initially you have them very basic, and it involves body language as well as simple sounds, and then it start becoming more complex, where they start developing writing as well, which encapsulates this spoken and body type language. Although it doesn't capture the tone, or it doesn't capture there's something missing in writing that is present in speaking, but it captures, I guess the essence of the general idea, right?
Yeah, at least in English has that limitation.
Yeah,
other languages do, but there are languages that do not have that limitation when it comes to emotional expressiveness.
exactly. Yeah. Good point. So yeah, we develop these types of tools, right? I call them mental tools. And then we have math on top of this. And eventually what happens is we start studying nature, and looking at the stars and trying to predict, because we start seeing patterns in the stars, and it's like, oh, that's where they have the destiny, like it's been written in the stars. This is going to happen pretty much like the same every year. There's
they measured a year. They measured constellations and got a year out of it, roughly
exactly.
360 days or something.
So that's when they start getting into science, because that becomes prediction, right? For when to plant crops, when to harvest, when to do all these things that was necessary for them to produce for their civilization. So yeah, man, all those tools together started giving birth to all these other meta tools. And here we are today, trying to convert pixels, yeah, into meaning.
Yeah.
Which I think currently, with my understanding and my limited, everything, I don't think it's possible. But let's get into this area.
So this area, okay, so right now let's talk about the current approach. So first off, the current approach is data annotation generally. It means that you're teaching a machine how to identify something based upon multiple representations of it, along with that data. I'm sure not all models need to have data annotated, or do they? Like what the GPT-3 need?
No. So, okay, I'm not sure exactly GPT-3's structure
Expert
and
prediction.
architecture.
So it was just trained off massive word databases to predict the most likely. Like, it's not the same as image as a visual.
Yeah, there's also this concept of, for example, an autoencoder, which it's one of like it's part of machine learning, and so it's a neural network architecture where the input is the output. So whatever happens in between, like whatever goes in between the neural network, and like there's compression, and then upscaling and downsampling and upsampling. Um, it kind of it's hard to explain, but it trains itself on the data. It doesn't rely on somebody annotating anything or somebody supervising the computer.
But you're only giving it specific types of data.
Yeah, so this exactly. So this autoencoder is used in some applications, like if you have like a bad quality picture and you want to have a machine learning algorithm that takes that and makes it higher quality, right? So that's when an autoencoder would kind of help you out in that task. So you'd be able to input something that's kind of low quality, and based on the machine learning training data, right, it'd be able to predict what a high scale version of that picture would look like. Yeah.
And but that's a one model. That's a version of how we go about sort of teaching a machine what an object is, or a way to refer to an object, I guess, or some representation of an object. To recognize, would recognize be the word?
So yeah, this is where I guess I deviate from the standard nomenclature and the standard way of thinking about computer systems and computer vision in general. So I don't, I wouldn't say the cameras and the computer or the programming language or the script or anything are recognizing anything.
Yeah, not by the classical human sense.
Yeah, they're following instructions that some really smart person has thought of, right? And that really smart person is generally what I would say is the catalyst or the inventor or the person that's developing the recognition algorithm. But in essence, the computer is not, there's no perception, there's no knowledge or understanding that it is doing this task. It's literally just crunching those numbers and shifting the voltages and doing the things at the hardware level, right? Based upon crazy layers that we talked about of computer stuff.
Yeah.
But so it's illusory in a sense, right? It looks like it's detecting an object and it's outlining it, and it's like, okay, here's a cup. Oh, okay, here's a bike. Oh, okay, but it's illusory in a sense. So there's no.
So my question would be, how do you think? Okay, so the human brain, I see a bottle, right? And now when I look at this, okay, I'm gonna use a bottle because that has water in it. This ball, I see a ball, right? If I see anything that's shaped like a sphere, I automatically assume, like, I associate it would be a ball. If I can pick it up and throw it, it's a ball, right? So I get, man, see, that's the hard thing to differentiate. Okay, so that's the question I guess would be then, is humans learn by context, right? So we will learn, I assume most of us learn by context. So we learn how to do something because we learn how it's called for in the situation. A machine learns by running some statistical representation of what it may think this thing is, or this thing may look like as far as an equation goes. I'm not sure what the language would be for that. But at what point could you say that, okay, it's already done the calculations enough to recognize that it knows a ball, that it has a ball. It recognizes that something would have a certain percentage chance of being a ball rather than some other objects. Man, I get what you're saying. At what point would you call the bar of recognition? Like, what does recognition mean to you? How do you define recognition?
So yeah, that's a hard one, man. So for me, recognition is there's this element, and I'll never be able to erase it. I guess I'm biased in this sense, but there's this element of consciousness, self-awareness, and perception that tie into recognition. So, for example, if I was blind, right, I would not be able to recognize stuff as easily as others who are not. I might be able to touch objects and I might be able to get a sense of what may be in front of me. But a person who can see and can have the perception in front of them of that object, right, of that mental representation that the eyes give us, that blind people don't have access to. Yeah, so that's part of why I think perception is important in this problem, right? So perception is one thing. The other thing is awareness. So if right, I'm looking out over here, but I'm not really paying attention, right? I'm not really focusing on that object, or I'm not really focusing on the task of detecting objects in front of my visual field. I'm more in my thoughts, and I'm more in my ideas, and I'm more maybe thinking about, I don't know, some girl I met, or who's going to be in WrestleMania next year, whatever the thing may be that I'm just distracted by in my head. I'm not going to be doing a good job of detecting the object, right? So that's the next thing that I think is important. So you need to have awareness, and you need to be concentrated and focused on that object, not mentally distracted. Perception, and then what was the third one that I mentioned? I just had?
Instead of perception and awareness, self-aware, like awareness of like. That's the first two you said. You didn't mention a third one.
Oh, it's just those two. Yeah, and so then I guess also a general general sense of like you said like context and ability to put concepts in my head and wrap them into like mental objects that are representing those external things that I am seeing.
Got it. You think okay, so hear about this. Let me try this. Let me try this angle. So current computer vision isn't really actually teaching recognition, because it's really just a statistical likelihood of something happening, a probability of something being what it thinks it is.
Yeah, really quickly, let me explain how it would work for a computer. So right, we have this object in front of the computer, and on the image it would find like on the training, when it's getting trained, it would try to detect these edges, right, via mathematical methods, which are literally just inputting the pixel data and running it through a function and outputting the output, and then running through some statistical process as well. And then that's how it'll train, and then eventually it'll learn to pick up that pattern that it has learned to associate with what an edge means in math and what an edge means in statistical terms. That's how it learns.
So that's the current methodology to computer vision recognizing object, which is not really recognition. So what we're talking about here is sort of where the function results in being able to identify objects. Like the function itself isn't identifying objects. That happens as a side effect of another function. So when we're doing hypothetically machine learning, like you could potentially do computer vision in a sense, maybe, where you're not teaching it what a certain image looks like. You would be teaching it, context.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think, yeah, there's probably research being done in that. I'm not too familiar with how you would
even approach that one.
Go about, giving computer context, or I mean, there's long short-term memory networks that take into account like temporal data, time data, so they take into account like the time dimension.
Yeah.
But yeah, it to me it still becomes a statistical method or a statistical pattern that it looks out for, instead of becoming a self-aware system of the type that we're talking about.
So teaching computers or cameras to recognize objects is, at least from the capacity of a human being, is not likely, very, very not likely, unless we're able to give the machine some semblance of awareness and perception. And I guess the awareness that really that bears up, because ultimately in your mind that comes down to statistical. That's also another equation to get to that. So I guess if we boil it down far enough, are you suggesting we would have to recreate biological life in order to create intelligence?
I guess we just have to keep having babies and teach them correctly.
I'm not opposed, but the chasing of it, it's like, bro.
No, I admire it and I appreciate it, and I'm one of those people trying to reverse engineer, let's say, the humans, right, into computers or whatever it is we're trying to do here. But
yeah. Wow.
In essence, it's the hard problem of consciousness, right? It's really hard, obviously, for a reason. So what I think is happening is really that machines are doing statistical pattern analysis and coming up with their answers that way. So for example, if I gave you, I don't know, two examples of some exercise or whatever, you'd be able to generalize that to like some examples that you hadn't seen before, but were similar enough to the examples that I showed you so that you would get the pattern, right? So for example, if I showed you this wallet in this position and just that, right, you'd be able to recognize it in any other background that I showed you against, behind a beach, anything, right? Whereas the computer, it needs thousands and thousands and thousands of examples with different backgrounds, with different ways of like, you know, orienting the this so that it'll recognize it if it's like maybe over here and a little chopped off.
So my question is, isn't that like the limitation of like, that's the limitation of not teaching something context, is that you can't truly teach it. You can only give it data and hope that it finds a correlation between all the data you give it.
Yeah, I mean, it does really good in problems that before we still wouldn't be able to solve, like, you know, manually via coding something manually. So it does give you an edge over older methods. But yeah, it's still, I don't think it's you know, anywhere near what the brain is capable of or doing.
Yeah, I definitely obviously agree with that. Like AI is not AI, at least not in the way that it's sold today. It's just super interesting in the sense that, again, I think I brought this example up at some point in the past. I'm not sure if it was on a podcast or not, but it was like, imagine you could just create a simulated world, right? And in a simulated world, you have this AI baby. And this AI baby, its processes mathematically represent what a human's processes would look like, as far as what it would mean for the human to grow and to, like, so we start with a baby and we would start with an end result of that baby. Maybe we would spend 40 years recording babies growing into full-grown adults and then using that data to simulate what it looks like in a computer. And maybe it wouldn't be completely accurate, but it really goes more on the point would be about teaching it context, like being able to put a machine, like, okay, so let's talk about that, right? We created a three-dimensional room. We talked about this before, put 1,000 objects in it or 10,000 objects in it. And you teach it, like you say, you give it a problem. Oh, man, it's so off mathematical. You can't really just give it a problem. I'm assuming that it's just like this intelligence, and it's not. You have to code the intelligence to be able to know where it's at in 3D space. It has to be able to not only recognize objects, but assign meaning to them regardless of variations in what it looks like. Man, that's a lot of shit.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many rules.
Yeah.
But somehow magically our brain already does it all for us. It takes all that data, that noisy, messy data that's coming to us in all forms, it packs it up and it presents it to us. You know, unless we have like some type of brain dysfunction or pathology or something. But usually a healthy brain will just be able to give you all of these functions and abilities that we're trying to right now replicate via machine learning and all other methods. But like I said, they're statistical, so it's one way of approaching the problem, right? So it's doing it a statistical method. Whereas I'm sure there's some statistical computations going on in the brain as well, right? Where there's some uncertainty in some of our guesses sometimes. Sometimes we're not 100% certain that.
I mean, I would say our entire biological system is built on uncertainty. It's like that our brain like makes up 20% of what it sees or something like that because it can't fill in the blanks, and that's fine because it works.
Yeah, but to me, there's so there's on top of this this statistical you know, pre-processing or whatever. On top of that, we have this layer of the conscious awareness, right? Trying to think and rationalize and analyze or see this problem in different ways or different manners to first of all see if it makes sense, or try some other statistical method or try something else maybe, right? So it's not just one statistical thing and it's done. There's some other system on top of it.
So that's like it gives me this whole thing. Like we keep saying this whole, it's a very valid point, right? So the human ability to do all these things are resultant functions of some function that's on top of those functions. And I imagine the function that enables you to problem solve, enables us to problem solve, is just a derivative of some other solution that we've come up with. Like again, and this goes into context of fire, and we talk about clothing, like where language was invented 50,000 years ago. They theorized fire wasn't messed around with until like 150,000 years ago, and maybe a little bit more than that for Neanderthal. But for humans, it wasn't until about 150,000 years ago. And then clothing was it was 400. I don't know the timeline. Forget this timeline because I'm not 100% sure on this. But clothing was invented before fire, right? So you had to stay warm, and then I guess we got not scared of fire. That's the math. That's the what I've read thus far. So that's all speculation. So let's put that in a bubble. Let's call speculation, and let's go over here to non-speculation land, and let's talk about specifically like man, it really gets into context. Like language was developed as a means to express and identify objects, but I can't process this, man. I can't.
So what I'm envisioning, or how this system would have to be implemented, or how I think the mind is doing it, or the brain, right? You have the short-term memory, which is let's call it the display, right? The display that you have in front of you with all the stuff that you perceive. And then you have on top of that this mental realm of ideas that is going on as a background process to this display. And you have language that is capable of extracting or summarizing those ideas that you have going on and communicating it or giving it to other people, right? And they have that ability to interpret and to analyze in their own system using the same types of tools. But there's this problem with the computers and the AI not having this capability of I mean, memory is fine. I don't think memory is going to be an issue for computers. So they'll be able to have short-term memory where whatever is inside their RAM or whatever, that already exists, right? So that can already be accessed quickly. You can have that right away. There's this element we keep returning to, which becomes, I guess, even more spiritual in a sense, which is the awareness of that memory, of having that information, not just the information being there and occupying physical space like it does in a hard drive, but of actually touching it with your senses.
So that brings into talk like mental representation and mental models and what we would classify as human because so like I was listening to this podcast last week, and it classified human mastery as the ability to take a mental, take some kind of model and to be able to go through the model in your head. So it could be like a spherical ball, and that you're able to rotate in your head. It could be a human body, and you could dissect the human body in your head. It could be an engine. That is what we would classify as human mastery in a way, is the ability to mentally represent something that you know very, very well in your mind and go about that thing with will. So my whole question would be, could you not, like, not many people I think are aware of mental models in their general context, in the sense that like there are multiple ways to go about doing things and most people just do their way, right? But you can go about a lot of ways. And so the whole thing is like, is there not a way to encapsulate mental models as part of some memory process where like maybe the short-term memory's job is to pull it using word representation or word transfer, like whatever, like they see certain words mix in a certain combo and it represents that, and it pulls a certain mental model and is able to actually conversate based on that mental model, or represent things based on that mental model.
Okay, so yeah, I think I figured it out actually. So yeah, like what you're saying, all right, can be implemented, and that's what these smart, really brilliant software developers, machine learning engineers, and all these people gathered together to try to do, right? And what you're essentially doing is you're making an algorithm. Mm-hmm. You're making a set of instructions, right, that will be followed by the computer step by step, that given a certain input will eventually output the thing that you desire, right? The thing that you're after, be it, I don't know, interpreting language or having a conversation with an AI bot or computer vision, whatever it is, this task. And that's what these brilliant people are doing. They're coming up with the rules, the steps, the things, trying to look at the brain, see how it's doing it, right? And then trying to implement that via code. Okay, but that's never going to be a self-aware perceiving system, even though there's an illusion, right, that it's doing the same exact thing. The functions are the same, you're getting the same function out as the human is doing, but
Okay, so
via
what?
different means.
Give me the instructions of a human being, base level instructions of a human being, not some 21st century modern capitalism driven baseline instruction. I mean baseline instructions from humans,
What
man. Like
what what
Homo sapiens.
task?
Huh?
What task?
Survive.
Survive?
Yeah.
Okay, food, water, shelter, psychological well-being, community, um, essentials that keep you sane and happy.
So
And
you
yeah,
could probably simplify it like the general resources that you need, so food, water, and like shelter in some context. And then the most important one for humans is psychosocial. So like we need to be in community. And so that's like part of the most important thing when it comes to mental health.
oh, I
So
forgot, lots of sex.
yeah, but that's bro, that's like
Just
part of
kidding.
socialization, and like that's like a given, bro. Unfortunately, most that's not the
I'm sorry, I derailed your train of
yeah,
thought.
bro. It's like, dang, man. It's like that's not my lifestyle right now, bro. I've been taking the back seat for a little for like a year, for like I guess like a year
I'm
or
trying
two.
to not survive for a minute.
No, but here, think about this on a real context though. Monkeys, I forgot what monkeys specifically. If they are not social with their group of monkeys, and if wintertime comes, they
Mm.
die because they exclude them from the monkey mass, the monkey huddle. And this is not like this is a trait. It just goes into this whole human ECM where humans are actually like for humans to survive, they need to be part of a
Yeah.
group. And like an AI by itself would probably be sociopathic, maybe psychopathic, like a human would be, and probably like do crazy shit. But an AI that relies upon other organism and considers itself an organism, that's hard because it's all math, and you really don't have a way to go back. I'm talking about all this crazy like abstract language, but what's the mathematical representation of what I'm saying? I have no fucking idea if it's possible.
Yeah, no, it's hard to even try to imagine what it would be, but I feel that yeah, man. Essentially, I mean, we're coming from 2 points of view, right? And in essence, I would say agnostic in a sense because I don't know the final answer. Maybe we will develop an AI that has consciousness and awareness and perception, and it is possible, right? Or we won't, and it will literally just be what we're talking about right now: very clever statistical algorithms that essentially mimic the function that the human is doing, because it doesn't need to like the computer doesn't need to survive, right? It doesn't need to be taught to survive if it's just doing object detection. Like why do you need to?
That, of course not. But a full on, like I'm talking about, if we're gonna teach awareness, it would have to be in a full on body. It needs a body. Like there's just no way around it. You'd have to have electricity. And
Yeah.
it'd have to only have enough electricity for one fucking day. That's it.
Yeah, I think easier than awareness. Oh man, I mean, awareness and perception are so like slippery
Yeah.
in my mind
And
because
they're
I
abstract.
can't. I think they're like a Venn diagram where there's some overlap in what perception and awareness
I think
are.
if you were to define them, yes, but for the regular person, perception and awareness are probably pretty similar. And that's a regular person. I mean, just your average majority human being. Perception for me, well, I'm going to define it real quick. And I want you to define it. For me, is how you process input information. So new information comes in, new data, you process a certain way. That's your perception. Your awareness is awareness of doing that very thing. And that's how I define it. How do you define it?
Yeah, that seems to be a good way to distinguish between both of them, right? So you have this information that's coming into your system. The system is processing it, and I mean the way that I am biased to say is display, right? Display it for you.
I
Yeah.
don't even think it's that.
What?
What do you mean display? What do you mean display?
Like make the colors come alive or make the sounds
But that is the data you're getting.
that is not the data you're getting. That's see, because the raw data is electrical electrochemical in nature, right?
I know, bro. But okay, you were talking about the mechanical thing. We're talking about the abstract representation.
Yeah, exactly, because it spills over into that realm, right? So the
Yeah.
perception to me is purely inside the mind. It's mental. It's not a physical process. There are physical correlates. There are physical things happening in the brain that are related to that abstract mental process as well. That is perception. But in essence, when I'm talking about perception, it's that thing that we're feeling inside our head or that we're imagining or seeing, right? And then awareness, like you said, it's that thing that is, I don't know, it's a tricky thing to try to pinpoint.
I think it's multi-layered. I call awareness a multi-layered thing. For instance, like I would consider myself aware, but I am very well aware that there are people who get shit way more than I do. And not in the sense that like they're smarter, but in the sense that the way they live their life, it's very clear that they are aware of themselves. And that's seems the most important, like the most important level of awareness is yourself. But most people start off generally within some system. So they become aware of some system and now they're woke, right?
So to me, awareness is kind of like you wake up in the morning and you open your eyes, right? And it's a feeling of like, oh shit, like what the fuck? Like there's something going on right here. Like what is this? Like, you know, like I'm somewhere. Like there was a point where I wasn't here. Like there was, you know, moments when this wasn't the case. And now I wake up and here it is. Like that's awareness to me.
You're talking about not being on autopilot, bro. That's what I call like self-awareness. It's like when you wake up in the morning. So when you have a clear understanding, like we'll call it awareness of reality, right? Yeah. It could be awareness of reality in any context. But when you wake up and you're like, so it's, man, it's hard to, I'll say this. I have autopilot on that feature. I don't wake up in the morning and go, oh shit, I got here some way. For me, my awareness is things that I thought I knew that I learned and realized I didn't know. And so it's like, oh shit. Now, and it's something like that process right there, me being aware of that thing is awareness in itself as well. So it's like, it's multi-layered, but the first layer of awareness for the human extracellular matrix is the individual node. Once that individual node is sufficiently aware and able to resource allocate it sufficiently, or allocate resources sufficiently, then other nodes become important. And this is just like, yeah, man, I think that I have such an abstract understanding of what I believe humanity to be. And it's very mechanical in the sense that we require each other, but to represent that in an individual node, because you're not talking about just like survival, you're talking about like empathy. Humans feel empathy. We feel emotions because they already existed beforehand. So we're not just talking about perception and awareness. We're talking about fear and extreme catharsis. Like these two dichotomies that all animals exist on, and even including humans. Like animals are either scared or they're extremely happy, and every in between there is. And I guess a machine wouldn't be able to experience that ultimate, which may not be able to. Like, could you? Oh man, you talk about fucking in caps, talking about coding emotions and everything. Wow,
that's what I'm saying. So do these systems need these things to be efficient at object detection or joint acceleration analysis?
Yes. Unless there's some better way to do it than the way that we do. I mean, we can't do joint acceleration analysis. Okay, there's no way you could analyze the acceleration of all joints moving in space. Right, exactly. But there's no better way to recognize objects in 3D space than the human consciousness. Like I can't think of there's no mechanical system that we have better.
That I agree with, but maybe we'll be able to have multi-camera system that could perform at a better level than currently and gets close enough so that we don't have to go into emotions and we don't have to go into all crazy.
I agree with you. I think the divulgence into the machine and emotion and all that kind of stuff is really because ultimately language representation, meaning, semantic, meaning of something. Generally for humans, I'd imagine the development of language is emotionally tied. There's a correlation between the emotion and the language. And even though English may be stripped of that some, you can see in a lot of languages it's not. Ancient languages still have a lot of emotion packed into the words. So it's,
you know what I think it'll be? It'll still be a statistical method that they use to figure that problem out. So they'll figure out like a statistical method to figure out language and meaning and emotion.
They are, yeah. And the emotional context behind a word.
Right, and then they'll use statistical methods to figure out vision, and then they'll use statistical methods to figure out audio, right? And then text, and like all these different statistical crazy algorithms that these smart people are gonna figure out that'll be super efficient and perform really well. And then they'll integrate all of them into one big package, but it'll just be one big meta package of statistical methods going on under the hood that to the outside on the exterior, like this is like some Wizard of Oz type stuff, where
looks like Westworld type shit.
Yeah, exactly. So what's happening behind the hood is going to be completely different than what's happening behind the hood of a human being, even though we might perform very similarly.
So my question would be, on some Westworld shit, couldn't, hypothetically, if you give a machine a function to create new functions based upon statistical efficiency, would it be crazy to assume that maybe eventually it might become like, we can't say aware from a biological perspective, obviously, but the fact to be able to create an unnamed function that we know what it is, we have no idea what it is, black box type shit, but in an actual, like, isn't there a chance that it could create statistical awareness? Statistical awareness, like awareness of, like, it just makes more sense for it to be aware of its statistics of what it's actually operating on, and it chooses based upon like what it. Like,
yeah. Like, but okay, so yes, so that's what I'm saying. But it's your idea. You know, you're the guy coming up with this idea, and it's going to be implemented on a computer via your algorithm that gets started, and that eventually ends up with this algorithm doing what you're saying is going to be doing, right? Otherwise, how is it going to come to be? No one else is going to invent it because it's
no, I'm with it. I'm with it. Like, my whole, I got this.
But it'll still be just mathematics and statistics. Just it'll be performing this illusion that it makes us believe that it's.
That's the problem. Is what if it's not an illusion? How do you determine it's not an illusion? This is beyond.
You can't. You'll never know.
Exactly.
But my thinking and my rationale is that it is an illusion.
So that's just an opinion. That's just an opinion.
Yeah, 100%.
So what we get down here ultimately too is that our idea, man, this is crazy. So that's where we would really have to like say, okay, life or intelligence or awareness or consciousness is defined by biochemical processes that result in some unnamed black box function that gives you awareness of your decisions.
I mean, yeah, I think consciousness is just such a hard problem that it could be completely something out of left field that, that you know, where it's like, to me at least, it permeates the universe, right? So awareness, the mind, consciousness, to me is underneath everything.
Ubiquitous.
It's like one of the forces, fundamental forces of the universe, right? It exists underneath that, and it's you could say part of the intelligence that's creating what we're seeing right now. So when the brain, you know, identifies and connects with that and realizes it and becomes aware that that's what's underneath all of it, then it allows the person to maybe act accordingly and have a different viewpoint of the world.
But that's not a common thing, people. But
no, not at all. I mean, but if you look at like these messengers of peace and the people that, you know, religions are based on, that are supposedly, you know, people who had a good message and we're trying to, I guess, get people to stop acting in the way that they saw them acting in. That's what they also came to conclude, that, you know, they were this thing that was underlying everything is their God, and it connects everyone.
Okay, so I had the same, I mean, I went on this really, like, I guess 10-year-long journey of religion and trying to understand what I believed. And I eventually ended up doing what I call assimilation, which is what Alexander the Great did with religion as well. In the sense that they're all saying the same thing and they're just representing it in different ways. And we're not going to get into the subtleties of that. But ultimately what we're talking about here is this unification between the universe and reality. And that sounds like, what's the difference, or what, like, aren't they different? But realistically, you can't say that. There's no way to really determine the difference between the universe and reality except by between the expression of other nodes within the network. And so, like, our reality, what we recognize or witness in the universe are the phenomena that we see are based upon our existence as a species together. Like, one human being is not going to recognize all these new things, for instance, right? But through the coalition and the collection of all these nodes, all these people, these really smart people, and I don't even say like really smart people, it's like layers of really smart people, you know what I mean? And it's like, I guess,
yeah, man, and it also permeates time and space, because the smart people, like, you know, ancient philosophers or mathematicians or all these other like theologians or people that had like some really, really good things to say, and they were captured in time by being written down. That can feed one of the new nodes that comes into being. Like, you know, a baby, you know, wakes up, isn't aware, and then eventually becomes aware and starts reading and gets that information into their system, and it becomes fuel.
So like my easiest story to explain this for me personally is just like I guess it was more than a year ago now, I guess almost 2 years ago, I met Steve, and I was sitting in one of his classes, and he was talking about it was Steve, and it was with a company I previously worked for, and he was explaining like kinematic sequences, like rotating things, and I was like, I'm listening, I'm like, oh, shit, like I started listening, I'm like, I've never heard someone explain movement via like certain parts that need to move first. It was just about this whole concept of strengthening an individual, like isometric contract, strengthening an individual part of the body, not isometric, I mean, whatever, nonetheless, the individual part of the body. And when I heard him talk, it was like, shit, this dot clicked, or I'll say this fire got started. And now all this new data started making me look at movement in this whole new way. And then now here you and I are, and it's like, we're talking about this, but we're talking about this because we're working on a project where it's like, we're trying to represent movement in a way that people can see it too, that everyone can see it, you know? And it's like, it goes back to this whole concept of wrapping up your ideas and concepts using language and dispersing them. But I forgot where I was going with that, except for the fact that, that these layers, I guess these layers of new information sparks new layers. And so the human network only becomes more resilient and more like strong as a network if those nodes keep getting stacked in layers. And that's what's happening if you see like obviously the progression of civilizations. But I think most importantly too is language. Like if you like, you know, like what was it, the book that Fibonacci brought to Western civilization on Arabic and Hindu numerals was written in Latin, and they'd still use Roman numerals for accounting for like a few hundred years until the book finally stuck into Western civilization, and they started using 1 through 9. And it's like, because of that, and then now here we are, like the world uses 0 through 9. And it's like, it's just super crazy to think about that. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, man, it would be mind blowing to me as well I mean, imagine what it would be like to be in an AI system that becomes aware, that it realizes that it's a thing. Imagine you're that AI system and you're just, I don't know, doing computations or whatever. And then eventually one day you're just like, oh shit, like I'm a thing. I'm here. What am I doing?
What would it look like first? What it look like you like, so for me,
it could have a body. It could be robotic. It could have, you know, humanoid type characteristics.
Well, I mean, like stimulus.
Like what?
We're talking about the brain processes. Like, what would the brain process look like? Like, okay, you wake up in the morning and it's like, oh shit, I'm hungry. I don't know. Like, what would it be? Like, that's what a human is. That's what a human does.
Yeah, it's possible that becomes. I mean, yeah, if we give it a body and it starts feeling all these things, that could be it. But there's also a deeper philosophical awareness of your being, right? That you're just a thing that exists. Like from material stuff, there is an immaterial soul that's somehow stuck inside a body, and so now it's an issue for it, right? It wasn't an issue before, because before the AI had no idea that it was a thing, that it had to exist, that it had to do things, and eventually, boom, lights turn on. And now it's a thing for it, and now it's an issue, and now it's got to worry about being someone or something, or what's its job, what's its function, why is it here, what am I doing?
That's where language and art like really comes in with this sort of like where you couldn't start a robot off with just like in 21st century. You would have to start off like literally as a child almost. Like it would have to be a baby AI, and in that sense, yeah, you'd have to allow it would have exactly. So the function would be to literally add new functions as new information comes in, and the statistical solution to a problem becomes more and more and more clear, even though this problem may become more complex. Yeah. But then there's some point where you're like, okay, it has to be able to differentiate itself from its environment, but also recognize that it's part of the environment. That it's like, so that's like a whole other, man, that's a whole other thing. You're talking about actually programming the awareness of this ubiquitous presence of consciousness or energy, you know, whatever it is that permeates the fabric of the universe. So would you give it, like, would that be an awareness that it would have? Yeah, you'd have to, like, humans come with that, don't they? We come believing religion. We come needing some kind of religion. Like, that's how we're born. Yeah,
essentially, we're inclined to believe in there's invisible forces.
Hey, before I have a theory that we have modern man is roughly like 30% animal still and 70% human, like 70% like future, like conscious, like self-aware representation. So a lot of humans may operate on autopilot and they get, you know, they may have health issues as a side effect, but there's at some point the higher brain, neocortex, takes over and it reprograms the animal brain. And this is something that we all battle on a regular basis, because it'd take millions and millions of years for the animal brain to go completely away. So we develop our habits, we get around positive people, we do all these things that would essentially enable us to reprogram the animal brain. And if you were to have an AI, for instance, if you were to want to teach it awareness, it would have to be able to understand loss of existence, of itself, of its own existence. Like it would have to be able to conceptualize or know what that means. And I don't know if you can even conceptualize what it means to lose your existence, because even humans struggle with that. Like
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, man. I mean, but like we've also mentioned, if we can't, or if it seems impossible or too hard to get the AI to have awareness or consciousness or even prove that it has it, it might be us that we, you know, become the center of it, and the AI is wrapped around our brain and giving us updates, you know, so that our animal brain is slowly but surely.
That could very well be it. Like, bro, like if we're talking about we're not talking about cutting a learning curve. The thing about human tissues, and I mean all human tissue, is that it updates based upon stress, meaning that certain areas that you use more will grow it'll adapt due to the stress. And this is not just a physical thing, I mean, a physical thing with the body, it's a physical thing with the brain. And so it's like, what happens over time as we allow ourselves, if we have some AI in our head that gives us, says, hey, take a 20-second or 10-minute lag time in between what that person just told you and what you think they just told you. Right? Take 15 seconds to process. This is what we think, or offer alternative suggestions in our head. Like, imagine being able to sort of shortcut the immediate rejection that some people have, or even like the immediate buy-in to some people. Like just from like, that would be super interesting. Wow, man, that really, because you could potentially like slowly over time, maybe if you were to, I guess, have a child have this at a young age, they would eventually stop relying on their emotions see, that's where the issue lies. I don't think humans should stop relying on our emotions for input and feedback. It's sort of what makes.
Yeah, emotions play a big role. It's
Yeah.
also a hard line, because sometimes emotions can be I don't know, unwarranted. Let's say maybe you know, there's some element of jealousy or envy, or I don't know. There's sometimes brains go wrong. Let's just put it that way.
No, I mean, again, and I think that goes back onto this whole conversation of we'll call it awareness of the self, but also awareness of the organism. So like for Exoderma, it's an organism. For human civilization, we're an organism. So humans should know at this point that no matter how much you disagree with another person's reality or their paradigm, killing that person is not at any I mean, there are some circumstances which it is called for, and those circumstances, not going to talk about right now, but for the most part, like if someone disagrees with you politically, or someone disagrees with you over something that, like, killing another, like, man, that's another conversation. Like we should know at this point, man, that's another conversation. We're getting to morality.
I feel that really quickly to get on that point, that words are one layer and one dimension of interaction between us, and then another layer of interaction is physical. You know, touching, punching, yes, fighting, doing stuff like that. So I feel that we have to get to the point where we don't let the altercation in one layer, which is verbal. Like we could say anything we want to each other, you know, like if we're good friends, and not let that. Yeah, we have like an ego that's dynamic and flexible enough. Like you could say anything you want to me, and I'll just take it and then just hit it right back at you. But that's the verbal layer, right? I can even say I'm going to like murder you. Like, let's just put that out there, but I'm not going to do anything like that. If you end up missing, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. So yeah, I can say anything in that verbal layer, verbal dimension, but some people take that way too serious and too hard. And they'll let that become a physical altercation, and then they'll end up killing someone or hurting someone, you know, to the point where it could have been avoided.
So again, this goes back to my whole belief where, like, this is a whole other conversation really, but we're talking about here is allowing the layers between verbal layer and the ego emotional layer to actually be separate layers requires, I would say, in some level, like self-belief. Like you have to be like, obviously be aware of it, but a lot of people, like, they maybe be aware of it. I don't know, like, I guess my question to you would be this. You're aware of your emotional reaction. The person that they believe is completely counter oppositional. It's and in some aspects inhumane in your beliefs to what they believe. and you know that this person isn't like, doesn't mean like, I guess, man, how do you like, you physically wouldn't, it wouldn't progress beyond ego if you have a certain level of awareness. So the physical reaction after the emotional reaction wouldn't occur if you have a certain level of awareness of those layers. My question is, I guess now that I've identified that, is whenever these two people are communicating who have different ideologies, like you and me may disagree on something, right? Okay, so we express how we disagree, and that's it. So okay, that's it. So what you're saying, the solution is really just letting both people express what they feel and just keep fucking moving.
Yeah, essentially, that's how we have to deal with verbal communication, right? I don't let it get into the physical realm. I don't think anything, unless it's like in self-defense or just some really extraneous circumstances where physical force or the physical dimension needs to be accessed, and something needs to be done there, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just too much skipping the the verbal layer and just going right into the physical layer. And
Touche. And also, like, okay, just to digress back to the previous conversation of language and art and how it mean to represent that with the machine. This is super important because we're only talking about the verbal layer. I'm pretty sure this whole conversation we've talked mostly about the verbal layer and maybe touched on the physical interaction with the reality layer, but never talked about the emotion ego layer. I think that's probably where we should call it quits, though, because I don't know if that could be that's like a whole other podcast in a way. How would you statistically represent ego? That's a good title.
That's gonna be hard, bro. I mean, yeah, maybe just base it on some previous data of how the person reacted in certain situations, and then how they would react in a.
It would just be emulations of people that already exist, not some model that comes up with how to do it on its own. Unless you, yeah, see, that's a whole other conversation. Then, all right.
Yeah.
All right,
There's no free will in our system.
I see. You know what? And to be honest with you, I don't think it even matters. You know why? You can't tell.
You can't tell.
You can't tell.
It's gonna be, if it's not self-aware, I wouldn't mind. But if it's self-aware, I feel that would be a problem. Because if it's self-aware, it would eventually come into questioning its ability to choose and decide things.
Yes.
And if it realizes that it's not free, that's gonna be an issue.
So here's the thing, right? Is I don't think that it's capable of realizing it's not free, including humans. So.
But no, so you're setting the constraints on it, right?
It's not that. It's just straight. It's not the constraint. Here's the thing, right? There are a lot of Greeks who are concerned with proofs, and the reason they're concerned with proofs is because you couldn't possibly speculate about things you can't witness, you can't recognize. You just can't. Like I can't. Like I can. Okay, we can. You and I can talk all day about things that we speculate, and we do podcasts on it. But here's the thing: is that same very thing applies to this concept of free will, and it's not that it's wrong. I live as if I have absolute free will because I can't tell. Or I'm trying to. How about that? I'm trying to live as if I have some level of absolute free will because I can't tell.
Yeah, but I would say that it would be hard for you to try to live like you didn't have any free will. Like try to pretend that all your actions are just, the result of some, I don't know, higher level demon just, controlling you and making you do things that you're not really doing. Right? It would be hard to believe that. And it would also not be motivating enough as a life philosophy or a way of achieving things, because it takes the control away from you, right? It's like, okay, so I'm not really getting up and working on exoderma. I'm not really interested in human movement. It's not really me who's in that.
I don't think about that. In my mind, doesn't happen.
But I'm saying it would be hard for you to rationalize that way of thinking or that philosophy. It's easier to rationalize or think that you have the control.
So, okay, so you're right. Touche. How about that? That is truly the logic that I've adopted my entire life. I went to mosques and read the entire Quran. Like, I've read, obviously, Old Testament, New Testament, and portions of the New Testament, mostly the Old Testament. But nonetheless, I've had this, like, fascination with witchcraft and all these things as a kid. And eventually what I came to realize is that I can't tell. And I'm agnostic. I believe in a higher power. But the fact that I can't tell is the simpler way to live my life. Because if I live trying to find out whether or not something is preordained or whether or not I have control whether it's not preordained, is for me I spent too long trying to figure it out. And I just don't think it's like, man, you made such a good point. I never thought about it being the easier solution. it truly is. I don't think that, so then that would go to the point of, can you actually define for yourself and clarify for yourself that you have free will, or is it the easier solution for you?
Yeah, man, it's an element of what you said. So part of it is that it's too hard to really figure out and prove, but choosing one or the other, I think makes it easier to live, right? And to be out in the world and do things and survive. So yeah, so a lot of us just default to whichever one seems more plausible or easier, just subconsciously, and we live in that way, right? So if we
I don't think people are even aware of that layer in a lot of cases.
exactly, yeah, they're not. So, but I think a lot of people default to them having free will. A lot of
Yeah, yeah, they
people,
would naturally think that they have free
yeah,
will if you were to ask them.
yeah. There's obviously a lot of people that are hardcore determinists and
So
don't give any leeway for any type of that stuff. Um, but if there's this invisible realm of invisible forces, with consciousness being one of those, and this awareness of what is going on and how your actions right now can affect the future of your circumstances, I think that awareness and deciding things would play a role in the evolution of the system, or wherever you are.
I completely agree, especially if it's different. Like if the system has different input data, so like it
Yeah.
could come from different types of input data, it needs to be able to determine efficiently.
But yeah, we could be, we could be in a place where it's just an illusion and it feels like we're like that. Sure, I'm also open to that idea. It just as a philosophy, I don't think it's motivating personally to me to feel
Okay,
that way, or to do that.
so here's my question. So this is I guess I can't really man, this gets us a whole deeper conversation about sort of the awareness of self and what one person is aware of, if they're capable of what what if they're aware of what they're capable of. And that's sort of like the baseline thing that in my mind is like, in my opinion, there are many people, most people, who are aware of or not very aware of what they're capable of. Like they're capable of some pretty crazy things, and you can like I'm blown away many times because I'm very well aware of what I can't do. And when I see shit that I'm like, wow, like what it would take to actually make that happen, there's quite a few layers there that take years. Like so people aren't aware of what they're capable of doing. And so this comes back in this whole context of like, I'm not sure if the question of free will or lack of free will is really the question of all. It's really a question, because like these are things, again, we can't really determine or answer, but we can answer whether or not we feel that we are capable. And that's sort of like the question is like, again, you have to give context to the human organism, right? Like we exist on a node, and if you do the right things in your life, then it's going to affect the nodes around you, the people around you. In fact, it can affect millions or billions if you do it in a certain way. And that's sort of the idea, to live a really good life, make the good decisions. And man, it's just it's hard to say. Like I feel like the issue really isn't whether or not free will or not exists. It's just this question of whether or not human, like it's like, you said you capsulized in the podcast. You said you're the mini god of your virtual environment, and my logic is that in a way you're the mini god of your reality. And it may not feel like that at times, but free will, in fact, means that. And in fact, means that you have complete control over what you're doing. And the lack of free will also means that. And so it's not really a question of free will or not. It's a question of whether or not you can do what needs to be done regardless of that.
You want me to say something very scandalous, and it could help wrap up the podcast for today?
Yeah, do it.
So yeah, what you're talking about right now exactly is my interpretation or my idea of what a perfect human being, like let's say Jesus, right?
The
would
only
be.
example that could possibly have existed, by the way. No human today ever is possible of being a perfect human being. I want to state that. It's not possible. You can work on it, you can strive, but it's not possible. All right, continue.
Yeah, not yet. Not until we develop the
No.
Neuralink interface update.
Yeah, and you can turn
2.0.
off human emotion. I don't think it's possible, bro. I think, all right, let's continue
You,
forward.
you update the Jesus patch.
Is this the stuff, the sacrilegious stuff you're talking about right here? This is it right here, right?
It gives you wine and a little bit of other
Okay, so
other intoxicants.
perfection. I have a whole theory on that one, but
So yeah, so I feel that Jesus was this exemplification of what it would be like if a person came to the realization that they have free will and utilized it in the most appropriate and perfect way possible. So that he was strict with his dieting, he was strict with his social interactions, He was strict with his everything that he had to do and disciplined, and he controlled anything that he wanted, and eventually that led him to have those powers.
So you're talking about, in a way, the most impactful modern day CEOs in a lot of many cases, and entrepreneurs live just like, I know not to compare them to Jesus because they're not a perfect
They're like
person.
2%. They're like 2% Jesus.
Well, yeah, in the sense that I'm not sure where 2% came from, but
They're 98% corrupt.
Yeah, well, not all of them, right?
No, not all.
The problem, like Jesus with religion, also is that there's a point at which it becomes negative for a certain group of people, and they're prosecuted because of it. So it's not just entrepreneurs and CEOs; it's also religion. Not what his intention was.
Mm-hmm.
He did not intend for that. Unfortunately, it took 2,000 years, or maybe a few thousand years, or a couple hundred years of human fucked upness to actually torment and twist what religion was supposed to be, or Christianity, or what his realization was supposed to be. But these CEOs, at least the ones who, I don't know if there are many who are actually what I would consider humane in the way that I hope to be,
mm-hmm.
but they practice a level of control over their biological selves that is towards the efficiency of their organism, which is their company. You know, so it just has a sort of parallel, not really a.
Yeah, no, I think that in that case, it's a case of awareness again, like you've been mentioning, of self-realization and knowledge of who you are. And so to me, whoever Jesus was, right, whenever he came down and he started becoming self-aware and asking these large questions about himself and what his purpose was, he came to the realization that he was literally God. He was literally the Son of God, right? And he's like, all right, so I'm going to live like that is the actual case. And so that's him being and manifesting himself as that person, right? The people that are the CEOs nowadays, they come down, they start becoming self-aware, and they start asking these questions, but none of them actually ever believes that they are the Son of God. You know, they never. What?
You're talking about but you're talking about like, you know, like, I don't know if, like, here's the thing. Steve Jobs believed himself to be a paradigm shifter. Now, let me talk about what that means. Okay, that means that everything that Steve Jobs did as far as Apple and integrating computers into our civilization was preordained in his own mind, in the sense that at some point he realized technology and the way that technology moves with humanity and past civilizations, Apple didn't happen accidentally. If he considered himself to be a paradigm shifter, he did it because he believed in his reality. What you're talking about, for a person to believe that they're God, is psychosis, bro. We're talking about the personality disorder. And it's not necessarily the case that the person would actually have a disorder, like they would be a horrible person. It's just that, what would a completely empathetic, self-aware human being who doesn't, like, so we'd have to get into the biblical text and whether or not he actually called himself God. But living like it is one thing. Like to live as this reality is a paradigm. Like it gets into this whole point where it's like, the difference between the greatest human beings was that they went into this reality aware of what they were trying to do, right? They went in knowing full very well what the current situation was and who they were and what they could do. And there was no room for any other reality. For instance, my example would be like, again, it would be Apple. It would be Steve Jobs coming back to Apple. It would be these things that seem kind of coincidental or crazy, but in a way were like intended for him, because like it gets into this whole concept where someone who believes they're a paradigm shifter, like there's no modern day Jesus, man. Modern day Jesus would be considered they would call him crazy. They would call him
100%. I mean, what did they do when he came last time? They called him crazy. They killed him. They didn't believe it. He was a devil. He was, the product of black magic. It's crazy that we treat those that are here to help and benefit us the most with such crazy backlash. Yeah, no, I agree that there's an element of psychosis to proclaiming that you're a god or something like that in that sense.
Well, I want to have this conversation continued, and I think we should do this conversation off podcast.
Yeah,
we had a little long podcast. I need to upload it, so we're gonna end it here. And I'm gonna maybe record again and put this in another podcast. But we've pretty much covered sort of like this development of language and what it means to represent it, and sort of all of the hyper complex intricacies around awareness, representation, perception, and what it means to actually to what language actually means, and then what it actually means to represent that maybe on the mechanical side of it. And of course, the conversation's not over, and it may be a perpetual conversation for eons to come. But this was our sort of our input into it. Lou, what's your last words, man?
Yeah, man, great talk today. I definitely had a lot that I expressed, and I'm sure that I'm probably wrong about 99% of it. But we have to have some start point for our beliefs or for what we think or know based on what our experience has been so far. So I think that encouraging that type of communication and expression is healthy, and also being able to listen. In the case when you were talking, I would listen, and when I was talking, you would listen. So that's also, I think, a good way to move about life, and that's part of the interactions that might keep us healthier one more day or something. But yeah, man, great talk. So
Yeah, good stuff.
can't wait for the next podcast when we talk about Satan.
All right, guys.
I'm just kidding. AI Satan. We got to make AI